G'day everyone, I hope you're doing very well. My name's Aura, and recently I've been raiding again in Classic WoW. But something I've noticed about the raid teams that I have been in so far throughout Classic has got me thinking, especially about the roles certain specs and classes fill. Something that has been coming up a lot in conversations with friends is how easy raids have been since Classic has been released. Now, I am unsure if the difficulty has lessened or people's ideas of the raid's difficulty has been warped from time and memory, but I recall hearing stories of how difficult all the raids were, which is not what I've experienced so far in Classic. Something to remember is from 2005 to now is many years of technology advancement, having stronger computers and servers, as well as the advancement in player skill from the beginning of the game. But this doesn't mean the raid difficulty hasn't changed, as many people speculate it has. Compounded with this is also how many off-meta picks there are in raid teams now that I've been noticing since returning to the game after a long break. What I wanted to talk about today were these certain specs that have been largely shunned from raiding environments and why we're seeing them sneak their way into raids now. Now, when I say we're seeing off-meta specs in raids, I'm talking about specs such as Feral Kitty Druid, Balanced Druid, Retribution Paladin, Shadow Priest, and for the Horde, Enhancement and Elemental Shamans. Now, before everyone starts jumping up and down and furiously writing something in the comment section, I understand that some of these make regular appearances in raids, but if this is ever the case, it's in tiny proportions compared to the other classes within the raid team. And I also understand that some players in their own right are amazing at these specs and in some rare cases compete with the meta specs within the raid. Now, with all that in mind, let's move on. Now, if you have a keen eye, something that you may have noticed is that all the specs that I listed off are hybrid specs. For those who do not know, the term hybrid refers to a class that has a specialization in either healing, DPS, or tanking. However, in Classic WoW, hybrid specs are generally expected to heal rather than deal damage or tank. Of course, this is a different case for PvP, but in this instance, I'm just referring to PvE and particularly focusing on raiding. Many raid leaders are hesitant to give up a raid spot to someone who could heal but is asking to DPS instead. This was certainly the case in the golden era of vanilla WoW. But do we need to have such a strict stance on the topic in modern day Classic? When I was applying for my first guild in Classic, there was a strict attitude towards what classes would be accepted and not. Troll specs, as they were dubbed, would not be tolerated until much later in the game, and even then they wouldn't be even given loot until everyone else had geared and sorted. Now, this may seem typical, although is not said out loud. I believe these rules and regulations and such are done to deter people from ever making that class or spec at all, and to push them in the direction of a conventional DPS class. Admittedly, some guilds are more lenient on the issue, say having maybe one or two of these specs within the raid, but this is usually with the caveat that you won't be getting any gear. Unless, of course, you're someone like Esfand who rolls a Ret Paladin and fed himself gear. But with that, he is a large streamer, and his guild and team raid members knew that would be the case. So potentially, if you want to play one of these specs, maybe consider becoming a well-known streamer and running a guild to feed yourself loot. But I think something that we need to look at in conjunction with the meme specs in the raid is also the overall difficulty of the raid. People who are playing Classic WoW now have either played retail WoW throughout the years, or they have run these raids for years and years on vanilla private servers. These two scenarios lend a huge amount of experience to a player, either in technical skills that they have acquired along their journey, as well as knowledge of game mechanics and understanding the systems within World of Warcraft universe. As I mentioned earlier, people were first entering these raids 15 years ago. The technology was so much worse, internet speeds were dismal, and I cannot stress this point enough. People did not have 15 years of experience of World of Warcraft under their belt. But as it stands, the topic of the actual difficulty of the raids is a tough one to tackle, and I'm certainly not going to claim that I'm an expert and I know everything. But from my perspective, they seem a lot easier to what I was told that they were going to be and how I've experienced them to be. Counter arguments to the difficulty of the Classic raids have usually been centered around things such as this. Things such as within Onyxia, if someone accidentally hatches the whelps, or Lucifron, the mages don't decurse the healer in time, or Baron Geddon, someone stands in the raid with the living bomb. I understand that all of these are factors that do make raids harder, and they can cause frustration or possibly a raid wipe. However, these are just mechanics. They are no different from any boss mechanic in the raids in retail. If you wipe from this, it isn't the difficulty, it's one moron who fucks up a simple mechanic. And you will find this in just about every raid in any expansion. For me, this doesn't really constitute any difficulty because it's based on human error. Say it was maybe the fact that there was too many curses on Lucifron to dispel in time. Maybe that the living bomb on Baron Geddon went off almost instantly. It's things like this that don't cause from human error. They're caused by mechanics being too hard, things being overtuned, things being impossible. A perfect example of this was in the Uldir raid in the Mythic World race, where no guild could actually kill Feta Devour. It was statistically impossible. So as we've said, the raids are perceived as being easier, but meme specs are still being shunned for the most part. Although I will concede that yes, they are not as strong as traditional DPS or tanks, but they can still work. And if you have a player who is willing to work at their spec, gear, and get the right buffs and consumables, these players are far more valuable than the meta DPS specs, if these people are just resting on their laurels. And in saying that, I mean doing the bare minimum. Something I've noticed since being back raiding, and this was something that was present before I took my break as well, is the extreme laziness and lack of care seen in some of the raiders within a group. There will always be members who will get all the buffs, consumables and pots in order to do the absolute maximum. Whether this is for passing or for the speed of the run, but that is irrelevant. Tanks are always on show and are an integral part to the raid, so they're always doing the same. Healers, as well, will most likely be doing the same. But this is where the weasels can slip through the cracks in the masses of DPS in the raid. There are so many people who do the bare minimum to contribute to their role within the raid. Some who don't even bother with world buffs. The raiders who never forego these buffs are the meme builds. I've seen these people putting huge amounts of effort into their builds and preparation for the raid in order to do the absolute best that they can. And the reason for this, I believe, is that these people are trying to play the spec that they truly want to play. And this has been one of my major gripes with Classic WoW for almost as long as it's been around, which is the fact that so many specs are unplayable. And I know this is the case, and it will be the case, and it will forever be the case, but it is still frustrating. I hope the guild leaders at this stage of the game start to look at the players that they have in their guild and realise that rather than just the spec they play, that they should bring the player. The famous line from Blizzard, I know. Because after all, Classic WoW is about community and helping one another. If your guildies are just out for themselves, they're just about as useless as one of the main specs. Or maybe I've just surrounded myself with people who are taking the game far too seriously. However, I find myself fortunate that my current guild, we currently have a Feral Druid, we also have a Boomkin, a Shadow Priest as well, so they're certainly in there. I'm hoping to get my Rep Paladin in soon too. However guys, those are just my thoughts on the topic. I'd be very interested to hear yours in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe. I stream on Twitch as much as I can, that's twitch.tv/AuraParty. Let us know if you play any of the meme builds or the troll specs yourself. I'm currently leveling a druid that I want to turn into a feral druid, and I'm also trying to transition my paladin into a rep paladin, because after all, you should just play what you want to play, huh? See you later.